Not all novels need over-the-top drama, explosions, and suspense to keep readers captivated. Some stories have a quieter form of intrigue and take a look in characters' lives to see the little secrets we all keep. So today I want to talk about one such novel, Newcomer by Keigo Higashino, How to Read Like a Writer. Higashino's novel grabs readers' attention because of the characters, their secrets, and the eclectic Tokyo setting he chose. His novel also has a unique form that spirals instead of follows a straight line. First, let's talk about spiraling around a murder mystery. Technically, Newcomer is a murder mystery. The inciting incident is when a woman is murdered in her apartment. Each character is somehow connected to this woman, even though they might not realize it until a detective comes to question them. But really, this novel is more than a murder mystery. It's about the cast of characters themselves, the secrets they keep, and community. One way Higashino pulls this off is by using a spiral story structure instead of a linear one. In a traditional Western murder mystery, you have a linear trajectory, where the detective or the sleuth is trying to solve the mystery by systematically working their way through a list of suspects. But that's not how this story works. Instead, readers follow the detective as he interviews different shopkeepers and learns how these people are connected to the woman. Higashino starts with the people metaphorically farthest from the murdered woman, and spirals in closer to her inner circle and to a potential suspect. This is why Newcomer is able to tell so many different characters' stories, because it has this spiral structure, and because we're constantly searching for that main suspect. The structure doesn't feel forced or contrived. The spiral is a natural approach to the story, and I think it's a reflection of the author's thought process. This novel is exploring the effect of a crime on a community, and it's looking at those ripple effects. It's also showing how people are connected in a web of those little tiny secrets and lies we tell each other just to get through the day. Many genres, like murder mysteries, have a fairly strict formula that authors are sometimes expected to follow. But what happens if you break out of that formula? What happens if you have a story that needs a different approach? Well, then you might be looking at something like Newcomer, that is about more than whatever your genre's typical story is about. And it might call for a different structure. Next, I want to discuss character-driven. Every person has a story. Newcomer is about community connections and how people are connected to each other when they don't even realize it. Not only are these shop owners connected to the victim, they're also connected to each other. There's a web that's pulling this community together. Similarly, everyone has struggles and triumphs happening at any given point in their lives. Everyone is living their own story in Newcomer. At the same time, everyone has their own little secret. A white lie they might tell someone to avoid hurting their feelings. An indiscretion they're trying to keep hidden. Or maybe it's something embarrassing they're trying to mask. all of these secrets are seemingly small, but have a large impact on these people's lives. This works because Higashino is a master at quick character development. These characters are immediately fleshed out when they step onto the page, because Higashino knows their motivations so well, and he has captured those key pieces of their personality in just a handful of lines. What that means is each character is interesting. So a reader not only wants to know a little bit about them, they want to take those tangents to learn about these different families as they spiral closer to the murder mystery suspect. Character development is key to the success of the structure Higashino chose. If you have well-developed characters, readers are often willing to go along with you when you experiment and try something else. Next, I want to share how your setting is your game board. The setting is crucial to the success of Newcomer. The area of Tokyo Higashino chooses to focus on gives that setting its own distinct personality, so the place almost becomes a character in its own right. This area of Tokyo is an eclectic mix of modern and traditional Japanese culture. Whereas other parts of the city have completely modernized, this area still holds on to some unique and quirky pieces of Japanese culture. That's what gives it its own distinct personality. It also brings the setting to life in a way that if a reader found themselves in Tokyo in this neighborhood, they might even recognize it. Also, this particular story could not be told in a different setting. Only this area of Tokyo has the unique blend of family units and master-apprenticeship relationships for these eclectic shops. Only these people would be able to be connected to the murder victim without necessarily realizing it. So this spiral story structure and this murder mystery itself could not really be told if Higashino tried to pick it up and move it to a different area of Tokyo or another place altogether. The setting is vital to the story itself. Also, certain structures just wouldn't work as well in certain places. If Newcomer had been told in a more standard sort of neighborhood, this eclectic mix of shops wouldn't be there. So that spiral story structure wouldn't work quite as well. Higashino's use of these techniques are subtle and masterful at the same time. His book is quieter than a lot of novels in the same category, which is what makes it so special. He doesn't need all the fancy bells and whistles. He can pull off this story by just being a great writer.
So Keigo Higashino is someone who writes these really great mystery books that sort of play on the mystery genre itself. Like, I feel like if you are someone who reads a lot of mystery books, you definitely have to pick up Keigo Higashino because they feel like classic mysteries in a lot of senses. Like, I compare his books to Agatha Christie books a lot because I feel like he has that sort of classic sensibility, but he plays with it quite a bit. So it feels like something fresh and new and provides you with something a little bit different and something that I think if you read a lot of mysteries, you kind of see his like winks and nods to the genre a little bit. So the way this book is structured is actually really interesting because it feels like it's almost 6 different short story collections because you are following different characters that Detective Kaga, who is the detective in this story, people that he's interviewing in the town. And so this one is actually really interesting because this is a book where it didn't necessarily need to be structured this way, but the way that Keigo Higashino chooses to dole out information to the reader is really, really interesting. You basically see the same span of time occur, but you're following different characters over that course of time. So like in the very beginning, you cannot see at all what the connection is between the crime that's taken place and the questions that are being asked and the characters that you're following, but it sort of builds on each other as the chapters progress and you start to see how all of these different pieces start to fit together. And I just thought that that was such an interesting play on the way that mystery books are written that I felt like the multiple perspectives actually kind of worked, even though it isn't like multiple perspectives in the traditional sense of like alternating chapters or anything along those lines. Like you're seeing a chunk of characters for a certain amount of time and a chunk of characters for another certain amount of time, and so forth and so on. And maybe that's another reason why I like this one, even though I generally don't like multiple perspective books, is because you stay with the same characters while their storyline sort of begins and runs its course. So you get to see sort of like all of those characters' story arcs almost conclude by the end of their section. So I feel like these perspectives are all, again, kind of necessary to the story because you see sort of how the layers build upon each other, and it kind of makes you feel like you're the cop almost, kind of. I mean, even though you see that in the beginning those stories don't feel very relevant, you get to see sort of how Detective Kaga specifically is putting together all of these different pieces, and it's kind of interesting to see how it all layers upon each other at the end.
I had been learning Japanese in school, and I loved storytelling in general, and I always wanted to use my knowledge of Japanese and my love for storytelling in English and put those two things together. So I thought translation of fun stories like the ones in the soap operas and in video games and novels would suit my interests well. So whenever you're translating, you have a source language and a target language. In my case, my source language is Japanese and my target language is English. So I'm finding a Japanese property and translating it into English. And many translators, if you're not a native speaker of your source language, think that the most important thing to do is to learn your source language. And it's true, you do have to have very high competence in your source language. But in order to become a successful translator, you have to be very good in your target language. And that is what divides a great translator from a so-so translator. And it can make or break a career as well. If you are not proficient in English in your chosen genre, you'll find it very, very difficult to write a convincing translation, regardless of the depth of your skills in the source language. It's very true that you get what you pay for in translation, and if you are someone who has a property, say it's a game or a show or a book that you need translated, if there is somebody offering to do it for very, very cheap, you're not likely to get a very good translation, because it's a fact of the way that the business works that only a translator who is charging too little will not be able to support themselves on translation alone. Thus, it's very unlikely that a very good translator would be doing that. You do get what you pay for in translation. So the answer to how Asian languages translate into English is not very well. It's very difficult to do direct translations that are successful by any measure. The translator has to wear two hats. They have to wear their translation hat, and then they need to set what they've done aside and come back to it with a writer hat on and treat the text as though it was a guided writing experiment or a guided writing effort. And so you need to bring a lot of creative skills, I think, especially with things like video games or novels, to the table in order to do justice to the original. Translation can be a very long and it's a very personal process. You have to really adopt the work as your own if you're going to make a good translation.